there was a segment of Negroes who contributed the most to the growing problems in the 7th Ward Black community in Philadelphia. Who was this group and where did they come from? That's what we're going to find out right now as we continue with our studies from the Philadelphia Negro, published by Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois in 1899. Observe. It is often tacitly assumed that the Negroes of Philadelphia are one homogeneous mass, and that the slums of the 5th Ward, for instance, are one of the results of long contact with Philadelphia city life on the part of this mass. He states that people tacitly assume, or believe without saying it out loud, that people who identified as blacks were all one and the same, meaning they all think, act, and behave the same, and that the slums, like the 5th Ward, is basically a natural result of them living in the city of Philadelphia for a long time. So basically they're all the same, and when enough of them are put together, they create the 5th Ward slums. There is just enough truth and falsehood in such an assumption to make it dangerously misleading. So the assumption is not completely true or completely false, according to Dr. Du Bois. There are some nuances that must be understood. The slums of 7th and Lombard streets are largely the results of the contact of the Negro with city life. He says 7th and Lombard, which is right here with all the black marks, indicating where the vicious and criminal class lived. Most of this is the result of a particular type of Negro mentality interacting with the city environment to create the slums, right? This was one of the areas he had previously described as being uncared for and filled with prostitutes and gamblers standing on the corner. So he agrees with the assumption being largely true for this area. But the Negro in question is a changing variable quantity and has felt city influences for periods varying in different persons, from 1 day to 70 years. This goes back to addressing the idea that every Negro was the same. He says that there is a constantly shifting population, with different people in that group having experienced city life for a different number of years. And he's saying that because he wants people to understand the different segments of Negroes so they can distinguish between which Negroes are doing what, like who's doing the crime and who are the ones that are being good citizens and so forth. A generalization then that includes a North Carolina boy who has migrated to the city for work and has been here for a couple of months in the same class with a descendant of several generations of Philadelphia Negroes is apt to make serious mistakes. If you lump a North Carolina Negro from the boonies who just got into the city together with a Philadelphia Negro whose family has been in the city for generations, then you're making a huge mistake. They come from different backgrounds and carry with them a different culture. The first lad may deserve to be pitied if he falls into dissipation and crime. That's for the North Carolina Negro from the country. He says to give him a little bit of grace if he falls into darkness. He's new to the city, untrained and uncultivated for city life, so give him a little break. The second ought perhaps to be condemned severely because he should know better. He's got several generations of family from the city and should know what's expected. So he should be condemned severely. And that's supposed to be from the immediate family and from the rest of the community, right? That's how you put the fire out of the neighborhood before it turns into a bunch of black marks, right? So what does this mean? That everyone in the community had to take this seriously, and they had to be culturally grounded in morals, principles, and values that deterred the criminal elements from multiplying in the community. So the ones who knew better should be condemned severely. In other words, our judgment of the thousands of Negroes of this city must be in all cases considerably modified by a knowledge of their previous history and antecedents. This means that a study of the Philadelphia Negroes would properly begin in Virginia or Maryland, and that only a portion have had the opportunity of being reared amid the advantages of a great city. You can't just start in Philadelphia where they are now. You've got to go back to the South, where most of them come from, because only a portion of them have been raised in the ways of the city and know how to navigate the city for all of its advantages. That the Negro immigration to the city is not an influx of whole families is shown by the fact that 83% of the children under 10 were born in Philadelphia. Of the youth from 10 to 20, about one-half were born in the city. The great influx comes in the years from 21 to 30, for of these but 17% were born in the city. That's the age range of the great influx, between 21 and 30. This ties back to an earlier part in the book where he described Philadelphia as having a disproportionate number of young persons who were untrained, impressionable, and at an age when statistics show the most crime was committed, right? This age range of mostly single men and women made up the great influx of Negroes newly arriving into Philadelphia. Of the men and women born between 1856 and 1865, that is, in wartime, about 1/7 were born in the city. Of the freedmen, that is, those born before 1856, a larger portion, 1/5, were born in Philadelphia. The wave of immigration may therefore be thus plotted. This chart shows when Negroes living in Philadelphia's 7th Ward at the time were born, and if they were born in Philadelphia or not. The shaded area represents immigrants and the unshaded, the natives. So we can see that the vast majority of the people born before 1856 and going into 1875 were not native to Philadelphia. The young group from 21 to 30 would have been born right here between 1866 and 1875 during the time of this research, which took place in 1896 to 1897. This group was mostly immigrants, as we can see from the shaded area. And the people from this cohort made up most of the new people arriving into the city, or the disproportionate number of young people he's been talking about throughout the book. Much of the immigration to Philadelphia is indirect. Negroes come from country districts to small towns, then go to larger towns. Eventually they drift to Norfolk, Virginia, or to Richmond. That's the trail, from the boonies to small towns to larger towns, then to cities like Norfolk and Richmond. Next they come to Washington and finally settle in Baltimore or Philadelphia. And settled they did, because today all three of these cities are extremely populated with people who identify as black. Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia are both close to 40% people who identify as black, and Baltimore is close to 60%, so they settled for sure. The training they receive from such wanderings is not apt to improve young persons greatly, and the custom has undoubtedly helped to swell the numbers of a large migratory criminal class, who are often looked upon as the product of particular cities, when, as a matter of fact, they are the offscorings of country districts, sharpened and prepared for crime by the slums of many cities through which they have passed. He's saying that all the wandering from place to place has not helped the young persons. It has made them worse. It created a growing class of migrating criminals. And other people try to blame their behavior on whatever city they ended up in or came from. But Dr. Du Bois says no. Those people are the offscorings or the castaway citizens from the country. So they were already not the best quality of people to begin with. And by passing through the slums of multiple places, they have been hardened and trained by the street life, as if it were a boot camp for criminals. Besides these, there is the large and well-intentioned class who are seeking to better their lot and are attracted by the larger life of the city. So all the Negro migrants weren't of the criminal kind. Some of them were really trying to climb up the mountain and better their lives, and some of them did. He talked about some of the respectable colored families that lived on Lombard and Juniper, which included Virginians and Southerners. So we know that many of them were well-intentioned people coming into the city. We may then safely conclude that less than a third of the Negroes in the city were born here, and of the others less than a quarter have been resident 20 years or more, so that half the Negro population cannot in any sense be said to be a product of the city, but rather represents raw material, whose transformation forms a pressing series of social problems. He's saying that most of the Negroes in Philadelphia at that time were from somewhere else. So what society was witnessing at that time was not a stable urban black Philadelphia community. It was a changing population with a lot of newcomers. Dr. Du Bois looked at the molding, shaping, and the transforming of the Negro migrants' thinking and behavior as one of the most urgent social problems, meaning it needed fixing right away. Because if it didn't get fixed then, this thing could get out of hand. And just a reminder, this here is the lesser migration into the city, and he's already blowing the trumpet and giving early warnings. This is all before the great migration that occurred starting in the early 1900s, right? So keep everything that we've been going over in mind. Of course, not all immigrants are undesirable material, nor are the native Negroes all creditable to the city. On the contrary, many of the best specimens of Negroes, both past and present, were not born in the city, like the Virginians and Southerners we talked about who lived on parts of Lombard and Juniper, while some of the most baffling problems arise as to the young people of native families. Native blacks weren't all the way clear either, according to Dr. Du Bois. Some of them still participated in baboonery too. Nevertheless, as a whole, it is true that the average of culture and wealth and social efficiency is far lower among immigrants than natives, and that this gives rise to the gravest of the Negro problems. There's no way around that. As a whole, the Negroes coming into the city, mostly from the country, not too far removed from slavery and the slave environment, carrying with them a culture and a mentality unfit and unprepared for the city, gives rise to the most serious of the Negro problems. You see, the new immigrants usually settle in pretty well-defined localities in or near the slums, and thus get the worst possible introduction to city life, which is in the 7th Ward on 7th and Lombard, with the gamblers and prostitutes. That's where the young, impressionable persons find themselves. In 1848, 5,000 of the 6,600 immigrants lived in the narrow and filthy alleys of the city in Moyamensing. Today they are to be found partly in the slums and partly in those small streets with old houses, where there is a dangerous intermingling of good and bad elements, fatal to growing children and unwholesome for adults. Fatal to the growing of children because the kids are raised to see laziness, violence, and criminal activity. And even if they wanted to do good, they still have those negative, influential energies pulling them towards that direction. And unwholesome for the adults, because the ones of them that are trying to stay on track have to be constantly surrounded by dysfunction and chaos. So you don't mix hard-working, honest people with criminals, or you'll get a dangerous intermingling. Such streets may be found in the 7th Ward, between 10th and Juniper Streets, in parts of the 3rd and 4th Wards, and in the 14th and 15th Wards. This mingling swells the apparent size of many slum districts and at the same time screens the real criminals. Investigators are often surprised in the worst districts to see red-handed criminals and good-hearted, hard-working, honest people living side by side in apparent harmony. Even when the new immigrants seek better districts, their low standard of living and careless appearance make them unwelcome to the better class of blacks and to the great mass of whites. Thus, they find themselves hemmed in between the slums and the decent sections, and they easily drift into the happy-go-lucky life of the lowest classes and rear young criminals for our jails. On the whole, then, the sociological effect of the immigration of Negroes is the same as that of illiterate foreigners to this country, save that in this case the brunt of the burden of illiteracy, laziness, and inefficiency has been, by reason of peculiar social conditions, put largely upon the shoulders of a group which is least prepared to bear it. So most of the weight to fix the issue of immigration was left to the black community, which Dr. Du Bois says was least prepared to bear it. Unlike other immigrant groups who may have had a tighter community support or even eventual outside assistance, blacks didn't really have that. They had to rely mostly on themselves, and they were already struggling with poverty and exclusion. And this ties into the beginning when he talked about Negroes being largely responsible for the slums on 7th and Lombard. He didn't say completely responsible, because the whites and the city also played a part in it as well, by not doing more to assist with the problem. They just lumped the Negroes into one group as if they were all the same. But if they would have differentiated between the people and understood their background and origin, then they could have helped pinpoint the root of some of the issues coming in and helped further prevent them spreading into the city. All right, this is what he's talking about. And so from here, we're going to stop right now and we're going to pick up in the next commentary. And so I thank you for your time and attention. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.